performance training PST day 2, advanced imagery. Advanced imagery. The next 4 or 5 days, I'm going to give you psychological skills training of what I'm calling the advanced versions of imagery, focus, goals, self-talk, and performance planning that you can also see online at therealcircle.com under HPT, and then you'll see there's a whole section on high performance training there. At the top is high performance training. There's a bunch of modules there. They're free. You can take a look at those anytime you want. Under the high performance training is psychological skills training, or PST. Those are the basic versions. This is the advanced version. So I suggest that you can use those on an ongoing basis too. Perhaps you're using this audio notes on a daily basis, where on the weekend you're taking some time off. Maybe on the weekend you take a look at those PST trainings, and you can kind of get more information along the same lines. Okay, so these are the advanced versions. I'm going to go over the next 4 or 5 days here. But before we get into the advanced session, advanced training, I'm going to give you the basics of imagery so you can kind of see how it is, see how it works, and see how you can use it to your advantage. Okay, so what the heck am I talking about when I suggest imagery? I'm saying imagery is using our mind in a negative or positive way to reinforce or influence our actions going forward. So there's a lot of information I've just said there, and I'll try to break that down so that it makes more sense. And 2 examples of imagery are worrying, which I'm going to call the negative form of imagery, and an example of worrying would be, oh, I don't know if I can do this. I'm, in your mind, maybe you're not so much with words, but in your mind, you're seeing pictures of everything going wrong. All the scenarios that you can think of are happening in the wrong way, and you keep replaying that in your mind over and over again. In one sense, maybe you are using self-talk, which is a psychological skill, and in the other sense, you're maybe actually seeing pictures of negative things happening over and over again. So that's essentially what worrying is. Worrying actually is the negative form of imagery. We'll juxtapose that with what I like to call positive and productive imagery. So the opposite of worrying is seeing things in a good light, is having positive things to say about the outcomes that are going to happen. Ultimately, you're reinforcing in your mind over and over again, and you're seeing yourself going through, as an example of wrestling, skills. Right before your match, maybe you're seeing your opponent do their specific favorite moves, and you're countering that skill, and over again you're doing that. And right before you go out there, you're feeling good about yourself, and you feel ready to perform at a high level. On the other hand, if we use worrying as the juxtapose it again, going back and forth, so you can see how you can actually be playing tug of war in your mind if you're not careful there. If you're worrying right before you step on the mat, you may be seeing yourself wrestle that person, and maybe you've already wrestled them before, right? So they've headlocked you, and now you're replaying that in your mind over and over and over again. That image of worrying probably is not the perfect scenario that you want to be going through right before you step on the mat to compete. Now I'm using wrestling as an example, but you could be doing any kind of test, right? Any kind of test-taking skill that you would have, whether it's academic or maybe it's an interview or something like that. But I'm using other examples because worrying is something that people get very good at, and when you get very good at anything, it can become a habit. And when things actually become a habit, they can actually be done without even thinking about them. So think of worrying in that sense, and now think of positive, productive imagery in the same way. And if you think of both of them in the same way, you may now start to see how powerful any form of imagery can be. Okay, so now let's you can get more information on the basics of imagery if you go to that website, therealcircle.com, and click on the module that suggests imagery, and then you'll see all the information. Some of the information I've just kind of gone over there really quickly. So now let's go into what I'm going to call some of the advanced versions of training imagery so that you can use it to your advantage on demand anytime that you feel like it. Again, I'm going to suggest that this 12-day program is something that you can listen to on an ongoing basis. In other words, every day that you have practice, plop one of these modules in, plop one of these audios in the, time frame of probably like a year, I suggest, and you probably could master all of these skills. And again, I'm going over just repetition and training and drilling and practice so that you can see how this type of intentional practice, this type of deliberate practice will actually hone your psychological skills, and you'll actually get a lot better at them. Okay, so what are some of the ways that we can actually get better at this advanced version of imagery training? One of the ways that you can actually get better at it is by doing it every single day, just sort of how I kind of suggested there. How do we do that? Let's say you're getting ready to go into a practice, any type of training session. We'll use wrestling specific training practice as an example. When I was at the Olympic Training Center as a resident athlete, we typically had about 10 practices a week. Some 3 days a week we had training twice a day on the wrestling mat, and 2 of the other days a week we had strength and conditioning, and 1 day a week we had like a swimming practice or a cross-training practice or something like that. So I'm giving you an example because you may have something similar if you're in high school. Maybe if you're in high school, you practice 5 days a week, and maybe once or twice a week you do some type of conditioning or strength and conditioning in the morning. I'm just suggesting that, anytime you have a practice, you can use imagery before. Okay, getting back to how is this going to be helpful for us in terms of what we can do prior to a training session in our mind so that we can actually get ready for that training session. Okay, so here's the example. Here is an example. Right before a strength and conditioning workout as an example. So typically, I'll give you a bad example first, and then I'll give you a better example that you can reinforce it with. Sometimes, like if you don't like strength and conditioning as an example, sometimes right before that practice, you don't like going to the weight room, you don't like doing sprints, you don't like, and then you're replaying, I can't stand doing this, I hate, I feel so bad afterwards, I'm so sore. You're saying that to yourself, and the pictures in your mind are, I'm going to be tired, and I don't like going through it, and the fatigue, it makes me feel, that can kind of put you in a bad mood, which can actually give you a not so good of a performance in that practice, meaning you can do that every single time if you're not aware of it. And now because you're doing it every single time, maybe it's harder for you to reach your full potential because you don't necessarily feel like doing it. You've got bad pictures in your head. You maybe think you're going to get hurt. Maybe you do get hurt because the pictures in your head are of you actually getting hurt. So that's the example of a bad example where you're seeing negative pictures in your head of the practice of strength and conditioning because you don't like doing it. How could we change that imagery so that we feel good about it and we go in there with some type of confidence and we're way more motivated than we were before? And so I'm going to give you just a little trick, and then I'm going to give you the example. Here's a trick that you can actually do every single day. Anytime you don't like anything, figure out a way to like it, right? I don't like strength and conditioning. So now in my brain, I'm going to tell myself, strength and conditioning is a challenge for me. So we'll have a whole module on self-talk right now. But for right now, I'm going to give you some strategies so that you can enhance your ability to get your advanced imagery to a training place where you can do it every single day in training. And now you can change the way you feel about any specific practice. Okay. Prior to that training session, here's what you could actually say to yourself, and then you can see yourself executing, let's call it a running workout. It's like a sprint workout. Sometimes we do those at the training center. So I'm going to say this to myself before I go into the training session. You know what? The strength and conditioning that we do is challenging, and because it is challenging, it actually makes me better. Every time I'm challenged, I feel so much better after that, man. And in your mind, you see yourself, maybe the coach told you, we're going to do sprints Thursday morning. So, Wednesday night, you kind of talk about this a little bit yourself to pump yourself up, then you relax and you go to bed. Before that training session, seconds before you get there, maybe minutes before you get there, maybe a half an hour before you get there, maybe right when you wake up in the morning, take a look at yourself in the mirror and you say, you know what, I'm going to have a good practice today. These challenging type of workouts, all they do is make me better. Every time I get better, I get more motivated and excited, and because I know when I get motivated and challenged, I'm going to get better, and every time I get better, it makes me more motivated and excited. So it's kind of like a circle of success. So in your mind, after you say that, you kind of close your eyes maybe a little bit, and then now you see yourself, performing at your highest level, right? Maybe you're not the fastest sprinter in the world. However, you know how to work hard. You know what hard work is, and you want to push yourself to, the actual limits of your coach's training session. We're going to do X amount or whatever. So, let's say we've jumped through you're staring at yourself in the mirror. So you've kind of talked yourself up. You've kind of seen yourself with pictures in your head of you doing your best performances in that training session. Now we're actually in the practice, right? You're actually in the practice right now, and the coach is giving his little instruction of what's going to happen. All right, guys, let's do a little warm-up, and after the warm-up, here's what the training session is going to be like. We're going to do X amount of these, X amount of that, and X amount of those. After you hear that, maybe even while you're hearing it, you start planning. You know what? When he's saying it, after he's done, you do the warm-up, and in your mind, during the warm-up, you're talking to yourself again, and you're seeing yourself having really good performances in the sprints. He said you're going to do, 10 100-yard sprints and 5 200-yard sprints and 2 400-yard sprints. That's a lot of work. Maybe that's going to take you about an hour, but it's a lot of work. But you've already told yourself, man, in challenging workouts, all I do is actually get better, and I'm going to perform at the highest level that I'm capable of. And because I'm going to perform at my highest level, it's going to make me better. In your head, in your mind's eye, you see yourself performing at your best. You're not concerned about the guys next to you or on the left and on the right. All you're concerned about is you performing at your best, and you're seeing yourself every stride work as efficiently and effectively as you can. Right before the step, you take another step, and in your mind you see yourself pushing and going to your fullest capability. Can you see how that might actually be motivating? Can you see how that might actually build your confidence if you don't like sprinting, but you see yourself performing at your very best? With ultimately, that's going to help you perform on the wrestling mat, which is another trick I just kind of slid in there. I didn't really talk about it. If we don't like necessarily doing something, how we can, turn around is, we can change the language that we're using. When we change the language that we're using, that actually will affect the imagery in our mind. Those will affect the pictures that are going on in our head. So instead of something being a problem, you can call it a challenge. Instead of something being unmotivating, you can say, because it is a challenge, this actually helps me perform better at XYZ. When I do these sprints to the best of my ability, it's going to help me perform on the wrestling mat. So another way to actually use imagery is to, go through your wrestling specific skills while you're actually doing the sprints. So before it was kind of like a pre-scenario where you're actually going through things in your mind of seeing yourself perform at the highest level to your highest potential prior to doing the workout. So you sort of, amp yourself up just a little bit and get your mind ready to do the work and perform at a high level. This next example is actually during the repetitions, right? So, and this is the reason why I think this is really extremely effective. And I actually did this, nobody even taught me how to do it. I just actually did it, and then I learned about it later when I started seeing sports psychologists and reading a lot of books on it. While you're performing the sprints, maybe you don't like to do the sprints because they're excruciatingly hard and yada yada, all the other things that you can come up with. You can fill in the blanks here. Because your coach has told you that they actually help you perform better, and because you know that from a fitness standpoint, sprints are very similar to wrestling, where they're explosive movements that are actually going to help your heart, and respiration rate and breathing rate go up, which is going to help you perform in that. Okay, so what's the point? The point is, during those sprints, you see yourself wrestling in a competition. And during those sprints, you see yourself going through all of the moves that you're actually working on and getting better at. While you're doing the sprints, instead of it being hard, your mind is focused on actually going through wrestling skills. And I suggest you could do this with any type of training that you can think of that you don't like. As an example, maybe you don't like strength and conditioning in the weight room, and of course, I think you need to focus on learning how to do the lifts correctly. But when you're doing the actual repetitions, once you've mastered how to do the skill correctly, now you can shift it to wrestling, right? Most people like wrestling. That's why they're in the sport. Once you learn how to do a specific skill, instead of saying it's hard, it's this, it's that, in your mind's eye, while you're doing, let's say, bench press as an example. while you're doing the bench presses, you know the number and you know the weight and all that stuff is, and you've mastered the skill, so your focus is on doing that specific movement. When you're going through the repetitions, though, you're actually wrestling. And I suggest when we use advanced form of imagery in a positive and productive way, we can actually get a lot more out of our workouts. Another advanced form of imagery is to actually see yourself overcoming adversity again and again and again. Maybe strength and conditioning is a form of adversity for you, where you don't like doing it and put you in a negative state, and you use those examples that I gave you before. Maybe sprinting is another form of you overcoming adversity, because sprinting is challenging for you and you don't like doing it, but because you know it's important, you've overcome adversity by seeing other kind of pictures in your mind while you're doing the sprinting. And those are actually activities that you're doing, so you're replacing one form of activity with another one in your mind. And this other version I'm going to explain and talk about is when you're not actually doing anything, right? There's a lot of downtime in a 24-hour day period, and with your mind, again, I'm going to use two examples so you can see how you can play tug-of-war with your mind. In your mind's eye, you can go through all kind of negative activities in your mind, and if you do that on a continual basis, again, it can become a habit. If it becomes a habit, again, that can affect your ability to perform at a high level on the negative side of things. Maybe it's worrying, maybe it's seeing yourself getting headlocked or pinned or whatever. Okay, so this form of advanced imagery is going to, give you a wrestling scenario of overcoming adversity. In this specific example, you do time periods, right? Maybe you do 30-second goes in your mind. You do 10 of them. Maybe you do a 6-minute match. You do 1 or 2 of them. Maybe you do 10 seconds left over and over and over again, where you're down by 2 or 3 points and you see yourself coming out on top. Maybe it's a bad call, and in the past you had negative reactions to bad calls, but now, since you know the advanced forms of imagery will actually help you get better, you practice all of the areas where you know you've had some setbacks before, and in the past they sent you in a negative direction. But now, because you're focused on actually getting better at imagery, you've planned a way for you to overcome adversity. And I gave you 6 or 7 examples in a row. I'm going to give you 2 elaborate ones and spend a little bit more time on them. So in the past, when you've got a bad call, it took you away from focusing on the task at hand, and you've lost every match that you've gotten. But now, as an example, you do 30-second goes, and maybe you do this with a stopwatch or your phone, which has a stopwatch capability on there, so that you can get the timing of it down. You turn the watch on, close your eyes, and then after you do it a couple of times, you'll actually be able to get it to 25 or 30 seconds. Everything with practice actually becomes better. Anyway, getting back to the point. So in the past, when you've gotten bad calls, you were unable to stay focused, and it just takes you out of your game plan. But now you practice in your mind getting these bad calls, and over and over and over again, man, you shake it off, take a deep breath, blow it out, go back to the center. You're doing this in your mind as a practicing skill, and now you see yourself being able to wrestle the end of those 30 seconds. You do this over and over and over again, and then the next day you focus on something else. The next day you wrestle the last 10 seconds of a match, and in the past you actually ran out of gas, but now, because you've practiced this, those last 10 seconds you're the one that's dictating the pace. You're the one that's pushing the pace. You're the one that's controlling the tempo and the actions of the match, and you see yourself doing that over and over and over again. 10-second goes, and maybe you do 20 of them or 30 of them. So the idea there is you spend 5-10 minutes on this advanced imagery where you're actually overcoming adversity of things in the past that were challenging for you, so that you can actually get better at them. Now, if you combine most of the things that we've done today, you've got basically an advanced training program for imagery. I'm suggesting that over these next 4 or 5 days, I'm going to give you a bunch of different exercises. I'm suggesting that you can do one of these exercises each day. When you get really good at them, you can start to blend and combine these psychological skills. Why? Because just like your strength and conditioning skills and your sports-specific skills, we need to work on our psychological skills every single day. In fact, we probably are working on psychological skills. We're just not aware of it. But now, because we're dealing with high performance training PST, we're becoming way more aware of them, and we're carving out specific times of the day where we're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes so that we can actually get better at them. So today was advanced imagery, and the idea, number one, is so that you practice these skills and you get better at them, and you make high performance training PST a part of your everyday training.